Welcome everybody to Contextual Christianity. My name is Daniel Donahue and I'm certainly glad you guys are all here today. Today I'm going to be talking about culture and how culture affects our worldview. If you were listening to our last episode, it was all about worldview and presuppositions. If you do not know what a worldview is, or whether you have one or not, check out that video first and then come to this one. Link in the description below. So, culture. Yes, culture. Culture plays a larger degree in how we understand things than we actually give credit to. And I know a lot of us know that because we live in a multicultural, very ethnically diverse country, or at least you do in the United States. However, we still see things kind of through our own cultural vantage point. That's why so many people have such a hard time agreeing or understanding why someone is coming from a completely different position. Is they're looking through their own cultural axioms, and based on their cultural axioms, they're coming up with value structures and determining things that are worthy to pursue and things that are not. And different cultures have different value structures and different worldviews. So understanding that is detrimental to basically living in life. And I, growing up, went to one of the most culturally or ethnically diverse, sorry, I struggled over that word, diverse schools in the state of Oregon, which means it was probably, or I mean in Portland, which means it was one of the most diverse in the state of Oregon. And which means it had lots of people from different backgrounds, Russians, Uzbekistanians, different people from Korea, from Japan, from Nigeria, all sorts of people from all sorts of places, and it really made for an interesting and awesome experience growing up. However, a lot of times some people just didn't connect with other cultural peoples. I tended to connect with everybody to a certain degree, and I had friends from all over the spectrum of backgrounds, and it was a lot of fun getting to know people that had different views than myself. But what I noticed is it was less a melting pot and more a mixed bag of salad. People liked to hang out with their own people. The Russians hung out with other Russians. The Mexicans hung out with other Mexicans. And often that's what took place, at least when I was there. Now, that was not universal. And I don't think any of it was necessarily built out of racism or a form of prejudice. It has to do with value structure. People have different values, and different groups have different value structures. And often that's not a bad thing. Different groups sometimes have better value systems than myself. And the group that I know, but because I don't necessarily understand theirs fully, maybe I don't get why they do things. And that's why I try to understand people from where they're at and get to know their background and understand why they believe what they believe. And so it's a lot of fun going to a school that's like that. But as diverse as our cultures are in the United States and globally, very few of them are even close to the cultures of the first century. I mean, even ones that are very similar, like some that are in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean world, have similar ties closer to ours. But our technology has changed culture. We've been driven to embrace new and push away old. We're less traditional. And all of these things come into play when it comes to how you see the world. And that is why I would say understanding that most people, as diverse as they are today, don't really have anything on how different they were 2,000 years ago. Now, that's not saying that they're not human. No, all humans were created in the image of God, and therefore we are all able to, in some degree, bridge that gap. But there is a gap. And recognizing that gap is extraordinarily important. Because if you don't, you are going to read the Bible through the lens of your culture. And if you want to have a good hermeneutics, which I already said was the study and or the art or science of interpretation of the Bible and other books, if you want to have a good hermeneutics on the Bible, you have to know when and where culture comes into play. If you do not know when and where culture comes into play, you are not going to be able to correctly understand the Bible. Let me give an example, a quick example. I'm going to explain. Whoop, knocked over my phone. A quick example from, and I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail later, but let's look at the fact that we live in what is considered an individualistic culture. Individualistic culture has some axioms in play, some belief structures in play that someone in the first century did not. They lived in very collectivistic cultures. They were built on honor and shame. And so when we interpret certain verses, certain scriptural passages through a hyper-individualist 21st century individual that's always self-centered, self-seeking, what does this have to do to me? Well, that's as foreign as you can possibly get. Someone back then wouldn't even know how to deal with someone like us in that worldview, in that mindset. So seeing those differences are extraordinarily important as our interpretive process is put into play. As an example, here's another one that's taking place today. I was reading a book, author, I think, yes, Kraft, Dr. Kraft. His first name has escaped my mind. He was a missionary overseas, spent a lot of time in Nigeria. He's also an anthropologist and has studied culture for quite some time. He has several theological degrees as well, and so he has a unique perspective, and he's talking about cultural symbols and cultural things that are creating a chasm between us today and the Bible. And in this case, he's using an example of a Nigerian as they are reading the biblical text. When they're reading the biblical text, they have some hurdles to cross in order to really understand what is trying to be conveyed. As an example, when they read in Psalms 23 that the Lord is a good shepherd, that's a chasm. Because in their context, that means, well, if Jesus is our shepherd and he's a shepherd, that means he's insane. He's a crazy person. Now, quickly they're going to realize that their culture is getting in the way, but it is a major cultural barrier because in their culture, it's only the insane, the mentally deficient, or children who are shepherds. There's the idea of a good shepherd. It is a kind of a foreign notion because good shepherds in their context, well, maybe someone who keeps sheep, but another is someone that is not able to work in regular society because of the lack of the mental capabilities. And so they have to overcome that hurdle. Now we think, well, we don't have any of those. Our culture was, came down through Western civilization, and so we have a thoroughly Christian culture. Western societies, in fact, used to be called Christendom. So therefore, we have Christian culture, or at least parts of Westerdom is the West. No, that means just our cultural gaps, the divide, are just more subtle. And therefore, they can be more dangerous. Because sometimes they're cultural presuppositions held from people during the Reformation and or the Middle Ages, and we interpret the Bible through 500-year-old cultural schemes, and we think that's the traditional one, or 1,000-year-old cultural scheme, and we think that that's the traditional one. But in all actuality, it's not biblical culture. It's not Greco-Roman culture. It's not the belief structure that is from the Bible. So identifying the fact that our culture, not just today, but historically, influences our interpretation and how we read certain verses. And if we do not identify it, we will project things onto the biblical text that is foreign, alien to those authors. Because what is our goal here? Or hopefully, what should your goal be? And yes, I'm going to maybe introduce a goal to have. Your goal as the reader is to try to understand what is called the original authorial intent of the biblical writers. Which means the writer, has an intent, and we should try to understand his intent for writing something. We should not project our intent, but we should learn his intent. If we try to create our own meaning, well, that's an abuse of the scripture. And his intent is affected by the things that are taking place around him, are affected by his presuppositions, his worldview, and the original audience that he had. He's writing like the Church of Corinth. He's writing to the Corinthians. What did they hold? What did they believe? Understanding that is detrimental because it will affect how you read the text. Otherwise, you are just projecting your own beliefs onto it. And that's wrong. And so, once again, what is our goal? Our goal is to understand the Bible correctly. And that is basically, humbling ourselves, recognizing that where we're coming from and how we see the world may be wrong. And maybe our culture in some ways is better or not. And it really doesn't have to do with better or worse, but it more has to do with knowing their culture so that we can get in the minds of the original authors and understanding where they're coming from and what they're writing. So with that said, thank you so very much for tuning in to Contextual Christianity. Well, I'm your host, Daniel Donahue. Hit like and subscribe and click the little notification bell so you can get more videos a-coming. Thank you so very much and have a great day.